All right, once you have your base painting in, I'm just going to put the crisp white, and I actually got to paint that in of his collar, and maybe the blue of his tie. Let's get something in there for now. Notice I haven't even done the eyes much. Once you have that, if I turned off all the sketching behind, it would look like this. Right? I'm going to replace the background, or actually add another layer above the background and fill it with gray. Because that white can be really overpowering. And now with the gray background, and I can lock that as well, as I finish off the, go into more refined painting, I'll see the values that go lighter than the gray and the ones that go darker. Okay, now this is my base layer of painting. And it's done at a pretty high opacity. Huh. It's really hard to type in here. There we go. Now I'm going to add another layer on top of that. By the way, you can see my lion. That's what a speed painting looks like on the gray. So it does help. It helps fill in some of the little oversight areas, working on toned paper. But now this is going to be my refined. I'm going to keep this really quick, and I'm not going to finish it up. My refined paint layer. And for that, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to do the same sort of things, but I'm going to set my tools to be a little bit more refined. So instead of these big, chunky brushes, so on my base layer, I'm going to just fill out the shapes a little bit more. Instead of this big chunky brush, I'm going to go for slightly smaller, more detailed brushes. And I might even change my brush preset if I wanted to. For now, I think this is pretty good. I'll just make a smaller version of this same one. I don't think you should use lots of brushes when you're doing digital work, because it just becomes inconsistent. You have to kind of learn how each one works. So this is still on the base painting layer. I'm just indicating a few things, cleaning up a few things. Then I'll get to refined painting. The gray background really does help you. All right, so now I go to the refined paint layer. I'm going to lock the base layer. And on the refined painting, I'm going to switch to a much smaller brush, maybe about half the size. And I can decide to maybe have a little bit more opacity, so it's a little bit more predictable. And then in terms of the brush settings, I don't want the scattering to be as high. I want it to stay pretty close. And the shape dynamics, I might want the angle jitter to be slightly different. I can play with the roundness jitter, and that will make some of the marks a little bit softer, or the edges a little bit softer. But I'm using the same basic brush. Okay. Now, at an 80%, let's really get started. So first I'm going to paint with some of these reds and find a nice palette with which to do some of these shadows to define his eye. And I like these deep kind of burgundy colors I can get by mixing that red in with some of the skin tones. So when you find a color you like, you can paint it off to the side, like that. And then this kind of bluish purple. Just has a little bit of blue and red in it. Is a good dark gray for me to use. Kind of go against the warmth of the skin for like the shadow on the eyeball. The white of his eye. It's not really white, and that's important. It would look weird if his eyes were pure white. Knock them back a little bit. Slight highlight there. and then darker shadow. So that's about as dark as I want to get. It's not solid black though. Try not to paint with black. The lower eyelid, notice that it has a highlight that runs through it, right? And then just a very, very slight shadow above. So that's why I need the smaller brush so I can define that. When you're doing the eyes, even in caricatures, think of them as like drapes hanging over a globe. So they have their own form. On this refined painting layer, I can get into some of the wrinkles. In his skin, define those edges and then kind of wash them back. The creases, the shadows. And this is just fun. You just go on automatic. Feel free to change your colors quite a bit and select from, notice I'm not selecting from here very much at all anymore. I'm selecting from myself and my own palette. And you are able very quickly to block out something to react to. Now you do have to keep an eye on the big picture. So as I'm working on his hairline, am I getting it right? I'm pushing it back a little too far. So then I need to reassert it. And as I get more and more refined, I'll go to a lower and lower opacity. So I can just start working with exactly what I want. Okay, so I defined that eye. Now I can define the other one. And I hope that I seat it right, that I have it kind of in the right place, that it feels comfortable. But if not, the advantage of digital is I can, on my refined line layer, kind of move stuff around. Notice how little space there is between the upper eyelid and his eyebrow. I want to mimic that, observe that. So any practice you have in drawing from observation comes into play when you're doing digital painting. Any practice you have with paint mixing and coloring comes into play when you're doing digital painting. This isn't any easier than doing it by hand. It's just more efficient use of tools because I don't need to wash my brush in between choosing colors. Everything's available to me. I made his nostril a little too small on this side, so I'm going to widen that out with the highlight. Like that. The nostril should drop right underneath his eye line. You don't have to worry about everything being exactly right either. I think of every portrait I do as a caricature. You're going to make certain decisions. And then his mouth, let's see. The placement of the shadow of his upper lip. And then the highlight that defines the top of his upper lip. I want it to be a little bit pinker. So it catches the light. The Cupid's bow. Could probably lengthen that, move that all down a little bit. So by keeping it kind of shape-based through painting, I'm not locked into defined edges. another color that's going to be useful to me. It's kind of bluish tone to the cool shadows in his face. And then his lower lip. And I got that from the photo. That's a slightly different color. It's being introduced. And even at 80% opacity, I can still steal and get in between colors for myself. Space in between his teeth. Now, if I'm doing this professionally as a portrait, I don't work just off of one source, one photo, because then all the problems with the photo become problems with your portrait. So it can be good, especially with public figures, to have multiple references and then just kind of draw it like your own composition from the beginning. And I can refine the edge of his jaw, how it goes into the highlight on his neck. And how his eyebrow goes into his forehead, how that comes back into his hairline. Some highlights in. Use that base shadow as much as you can. See his eye a little bit differently, a little bit closer in. And notice I'm not doing a lot of zooming in and really detailed work until I'm happy with all the placement. It's about where things go, not about how detailed they are. The lower eyelid, then the shadow. You'll get a sense of where you can go a lot darker, just like I can do details of creases and wrinkles in the highlights that go darker. In the shadows, they might go lighter. So I might draw them in reverse and then blend those in. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. That was the base layer, and that's with the details. But the details on their own, that's not a whole lot of painting. You know, it's just refining certain edges, certain shapes, and it starts to all come together. And now at this stage, what I would usually do is make a new layer, holding down Option, Merge Visible, that just puts everything together, even the gray background. Or maybe I can merge everything except the gray background. Let's see. So that layer and that layer. Merge those together by holding down Option and say Merge Visible. Then turn those back layers off. Let me lock them so I don't accidentally mess with them. And now with this, turn the background on. I'm going to transform it. I'm going to use the warp tool, and I'm going to try to clean up some proportional choices. Because my drawing was looking a little long. You know? Again, they're not going to be portraits. Yeah, that helps. Kind of curving down that forehead a bit. Because everything should move together. So that is different than this, right? I ended up putting his eyes a little too high, so this helped me work.